First of all, I'm still riding from the energy and epicness that was last night's Solace, my sound healing series. Last night in LA, I'm doing it in Miami at the beginning of September, and then New York around Laugh Through the Heartbreak, September 19th, and then the sound healing on the 22nd, and then I'll be doing Vegas and then back to LA. Anyway, we're going to jump into this week's story time. This is for the Torah portion, Akev. And my chapter, this is my 5th book, Light of the Infinite, Emanations of Illumination. This one's called There's Always Money in the Banana Stand. And if you know the reference, you'd be smiling. But I'll jump into it now. So when I was living in Bushwick, New York, my roommate at the time, Aaron Wertheimer, an old childhood friend of mine, would always watch Arrested Development. Seeing it in passing, I didn't fully understand or grasp the epicness of this show. When I gave it a real chance, I was hooked. And there's so many lines from the show that come to mind, but one that sticks out is George Bluth Sr. reassuring his son, Michael Bluth, the main character, that there's always money in the banana stand. When Michael hears this, he interprets it to mean that the banana stand that the family owns will always make money, not realizing why his father kept winking at him while he was saying this, missing the actual message that there are literally thousands of dollars in cash hidden in the walls of the stand. Michael only realized this after the stand was burned down in a misguided attempt to get insurance money. Wisdom can come to us in all kinds of ways. Even a comedy show can reflect profound teachings. The lesson here is that we have to be careful in assessing where true wealth comes from. We tend to think that money comes through cunning, but the Torah teaches us that all is in the hands of Hashem, God. All is there for us. It's just a matter of tapping into this reality and not missing the message or burning it down. We learn in Likutei Moharan that God's light, which descends upon us, is in an undifferentiated and unformed state. It's up to each of us to create a vessel with which to receive this light, so that it can take shape within and through us. If a person's vessel is faulty, they won't know the true meaning of money in the banana stand. They just won't come to the realization of where their wealth can be found. It doesn't mean that the light won't come to that person, but that the person might not have the capacity to shape the light into a blessing. That's why it's written, "It is a blessing that I have taken." Because it's up to each of us to perfect our vessel so that we can receive divine blessings. We cannot choose our blessings or how much light we will receive, but we can continually craft or work to craft ourselves into a vessel that is open to receiving and giving blessings of light. In the first Aliyah, when we call people up to the Torah, I don't know the exact English for that, in this Torah portion, which is called Akev, Moses reminds us the road that we traveled. Hashem, God, sent hardships to test you, to determine what is in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. He made life difficult for you, letting you go hungry, and then he fed you the manna, the bread that came from the sky, which neither you nor your ancestors have ever experienced. This was to teach you that it is not by bread alone that man lives, but by all that emanates from Hashem, from God's mouth. Reb Natan elaborates on this verse, explaining that we learn here that sustenance comes from God's blessings, and that by reciting the blessings over the food, bread and other food, we invoke that blessing. Moses goes on to explain that the most important part of not blocking your blessings, which reads, "Safeguard the commandments of the Lord your God, so that you will walk in his ways and remain in awe of him." This all centers around emunah, faith, and bitachon, trust. That when we experience hardships, we often don't have the ability to see this as something that is ultimately good. To remember that there's a larger goodness holding the world and everything in it. Mastering faith, perspective, and humility is no easy feat. In fact, it's generally a lifelong journey. A few years ago, I was struggling with one of the most difficult decisions in my life. I felt paralyzed. And my friend showed me this famous painting depicting Cortez, the 16th century Spanish explorer, and his burning his ships. Cortez arrived in the Americas with 600 men. As he did, he made history by destroying his ships, sending a clear message to his men that there was no turning back. With this mindset, he succeeded in the complete conquest of the Aztec Empire in just 2 years. I learned from this that in order for blessings to flow, you have to move forward with faith and trust. That's how to escape indecision, to allow yourself to believe that all you can do is go forward and trust that the Infinite One will guide you towards what's best. Hasidic teachings refines the meaning of hashgacha prati, which is divine providence, defining it as God's caring watchfulness and direct personal supervision over everything that exists. For humanity, hashgacha more specifically signifies God's ongoing active participation in every aspect of our lives. The Holy One provides each person with the necessary means to serve Him and make His eminence, the divine presence, known in the world. This is most clearly apparent with regard to each person's livelihood. A person who has bitachon, trust, believing that God alone provides for all needs, will earn their income honestly and make sure to set aside time for Torah, tefillah, which is prayer, and mitzvot, the commandments. Further in this Torah portion, in the second Aliyah, God says, take care lest you forget Hashem by not observing the mitzvot. And this is like King Solomon. He said that he doesn't want to be too wealthy that he would forget God, or too poor that he'd have to find himself in dire straits and not be able to basically be focused. And Rab Nachman in lesson in Likutei Moharan 60 says that there's parts of the Torah that can only be tapped into and found through great wealth. So you'll understand that how you'd like. And warns against being lost in the accumulation of possessions to the point that your heart turns haughty and you forget Hashem, who took each of us out of Egypt from the house of slaves, thinking in your heart, my strength and my might of my hand made me this wealthy. Yalkut Yosef, quoting Orot HaMitzvah, explains the purpose of brachot, of blessings, particularly Birkat Kohanim, Birkat Hamazon, the blessing after meals, to keep us mindful of God's ever-present hashgacha. The next verse says, lest you eat and be full, and your heart will be haughty and you will forget Hashem, your God. It's human nature, once full, to forget who is the provider above all. Maybe we worked for, acquired, and cooked the food, but we can't ever forget who is the provider of all providers, from whom everything emanates and is created. We read here that we need to remove the thought that it all comes from our own efforts, because that is when ego manifests and holiness grows more distant. In order to ensure this not to be the case, we are commanded to bless the Holy One and proclaim our love for Hashem, for God, as it's written, for all is from you, and what we have given you came from your hand. This is spelled out in this verse, in this Torah portion. Remember that it is Hashem, your God, who gives you the power to get wealth in fulfillment of the covenant that He made on oath with your father, as is still the case, this everlasting, this eternal oath. This is an important lesson in giving proper respect to what formed you, to having understanding and gratitude for the people and forces to which you owe your life and all you have. That kind of perspective is essential to creating a vessel that can receive one's proper share of the infinite light. The reverse of this, as Rabbi Nachman articulates, tavat mamon, the lust for money, which is most apparent in a person who makes it their life's mission to amass even greater wealth, lacking emunah, lacking faith in Hashem. The person instead puts their bitachon, their trust in money, mistakenly believing that the more they have, the more secure and fulfilling their life will be. A subtler form of tavat mamon is seen in someone who understands the foolishness of pursuing wealth, but whose attachment to money makes them greedy. Lacking a generous spirit, the person finds it difficult to part with their wealth, and so is stingy in giving charity and tight-fisted with strangers and family alike. A third, subtler, or more subtle but more common form of tavat mamon, this sort of lust for money, is when a person worries and grows anxious about not having enough money. Their distress indicates a lack in both emunah, in faith, and bitachon, in trust. An inability to rely on the Creator to provide livelihood without having to sacrifice inordinately to earn. Working for myself all my adult life, I was able to see the divine hand in my livelihood at all times. I certainly could have distressed and lacked faith that I would be able to financially survive, but I knew from experience as an entrepreneur, especially when in sales mode, I could call 1,000 people and not close even one deal. Or I could call one person and close the one deal that was meant for me at that time. It doesn't mean that I put in less effort, but rather that I was able to step back and put trust into the hashgacha prati, this divine providence, or some call it the universe. These experiences also taught me that being engaged in business is not about finding the best strategy to receive. Acquiring has to be balanced with giving. Good things come from giving. Community, love, and wealth. People want to give to those who give and often want to hold back from those who don't. To give or to love unconditionally requires emunah, faith, which is a very tough practice, but it's one that rewards the faithful and sometimes punishes the faithless. Further in Likutei Moharan, Rabbi Nachman of Breslov teaches that money and dinim, judgments, share the same spiritual root on high. So for a person with tavat mammon, this lust for money, earning a living is fraught with hardship and difficulty. Just like Adam, after he sinned, the greedy person's sustenance comes through suffering and by the sweat of his brow. The more one puts into spiritual practice, the easier it is to gain materially. Based on the Zohar, the Rebbe speaks of the desire for money as a conflagration of the heart, and the advice for cooling the flame of this money lust is to give one's money to charity, to tzedakah. Giving tzedakah creates a ruach, a spirit of generosity, a ruach wind that blows upon the heart and dampens both the burning desire for wealth and the divine disconnect that it elicits. When a person is living and goes about business with honesty and emunah, faith, it furthers one's trust that all livelihood comes solely from Hashem, from God. Ethics in earning a living is so essential that Chazal, our sages, teach the first question a person is asked by the heavenly court after they pass away is, did you conduct your business be'emunah, with faith? Only those who lived life with emunah and bitachon, trust, will be able to answer this in the affirmative. Rab Natan of Breslov, based on the Likutei Moharan, pleads with God to help him engage in maaseh umatan be'emunah, this give and take, this commerce, faithfully, and to enable him to make Torah study his primary occupation and earning a living on occasional endeavor. He asks to not weary his mind with earning a living, and while engaging in business, to be able to attach his thoughts to God and to the holy Torah that is embedded within the give and take of business and the practice of one's worldly occupation. While certainly not comparing myself in any way to Rab Natan, for the past 3 years at this point, I've devoted myself to learning Torah so that I could write these chapters, these Torah that became this book. I've also gone to Shul more to say Kaddish for my mom's Nishamat Aliyah, for her soul elevation after her passing. I've seen that the more I put into connecting to the light of the infinite, the easier the struggle in the space of finitude and finances have been. Opportunities now come to me, and I choose whether I have the bandwidth for taking them, taking into account the time I want to spend with my kids and the time I want to be immersed in the Torah. The following is a story about the Alter Rebbe, also known as the Baal Tanya, because he wrote the Tanya, the Hasidic sefer that is this constant inspiration to me. And you can get Chayinu if you want to learn. It breaks it up by the day with the Rambam and with Chumash and all that. The Alter Rebbe once was raising money for Jewish prisoners. He was headed to a town that was famous for a miser that lived there. So stingy was this miser that even the lowliest beggar of the town would skip over his house. The miser was wealthy, but no matter the cause, he would refuse to give anything more than a single rusty copper coin, which even the beggar would pass on, as they found it insulting, especially from someone so well-to-do. The Alter Rebbe was greeted graciously by the community, but when he mentioned that he wanted to visit the house of the miser, they strongly suggested that he skip this house, as it would be a waste of time. But the Rebbe was adamant, and so they wished him luck and provided him with 2 gentlemen to escort him. The next day, the 3 Hasidim went to the mansion of the miser, and right before knocking on the door, the Alter Rebbe turned to the 2 gentlemen and asked that throughout the visit, they make sure not to speak, no matter what. They then entered the mansion and sat in the beautiful front room. The owner came to greet them with a small velvet money pouch that he fetched from his safe. The rich man looked at the men and said, "Oi, the suffering of the Jewish people, when will it end? Here, Rabbi, take my humble donation." As the Alter Rebbe took the single rusty copper coin, he smiled warmly and seemed very pleased. The miser was astonished. He had never been met with anything but disdain for donating this single coin. As the Alter Rebbe put the coin in his pocket, he smiled again, and in a beautiful and sincere tone said, "Thank you, Mr. Solomon. May Hashem bless and protect you always. At this moment, the Alter Rebbe, as he normally would with donations, wrote the miser a receipt that included his blessings on it. He gave him the receipt, thanked him yet again, and shook the man's hand, looking into his eyes with admiration. He then turned to the two gentlemen that had quietly accompanied him and said, "We must be on our way. We have a lot of collecting to do tonight." As the three Hasidim walked to the door, the Alter Rebbe turned one last time to wish a warm farewell to the host. Outside the house, the two gentlemen thought that they would finally speak their mind. One of them spoke up, saying, "You should have thrown it back in his face." But as they walked from the house to the front gate, the Alter Rebbe simply replied, "Don't turn around and don't say a word." Just then, they heard the door opening behind them, and the miser shouting, "Rabbi, Chassids, please come back for a minute. Hello, please, I must speak to you. Please come back in." The Alter Rebbe gladly turned around to greet the miser yet again, while the other two gentlemen reluctantly joined him. They sat back down in the beautiful room, but this time the owner was pacing back and forth. He paused and looked at the Alter Rebbe and asked, "Exactly how much money do you need to ransom these prisoners?" The Rebbe replied, "About 5,000 rubles." So the miser handed over 1,000 rubles from his stack of bills. The two gentlemen were completely astounded. Never in their lives had they heard of the miser parting with anything more than a single worthless coin. They were so afraid that maybe he was taunting them that they didn't even look up at him. The Alter Rebbe warmly thanked Mr. Solomon, shook his hand, and wrote yet another receipt that included a beautiful blessing. The tune of the gentlemen changed from frustration to disbelief. They looked at each other and said, "That was a miracle." The Alter Rebbe reminded them to be still, be silent, and to not turn around. As they approached the gate, they heard Mr. Solomon shout out to them yet again. This time he shouted, "Rabbi, please, I've changed my mind. Please come in once more. I want to speak with you." As they entered the house a third time, the two gentlemen's suspicions were proven correct, or so they thought. The miser looked at them and said, "I have decided to give the entire sum needed for the prisoners and their ransoms. Here it is, 5,000 rubles. Please count it. See that I have not made a mistake." The rabbis had never witnessed such a miracle. They asked the Alter Rebbe, "How did you get the notorious miser to give 5,000 rubles?" The Rebbe replied, "The man is no miser, no Jewish soul truly is. But how could he desire to give if he never in his life experienced the joy of giving? Everyone he gave that rusty penny to threw it back in his face." The miser was simply looking for someone to be grateful, as gratitude is a channel of receiving. It's the same with all of us as creations, how we need to align ourselves with our Creator. We often beg or pray for so much, but how often do we thank heaven for everything that we already have? The idea of saying a blessing over everything we do in Judaism, even on a morsel of bread that we eat, is that blessings bring in more blessings. When the miser saw that finally someone had thanked him for giving charity, even if it was a simple coin, it inspired him to give more and more. This is how we have to live, so that we remain humble and so that we become a vessel for blessings. The Arizal teaches that creation came about because the Infinite One had a desire to give. Therefore, the natural state of being is one in which chesed, the bounteous and unlimited influx of Hashem, of God's kindness, flows freely into the world, unhampered by either sin or dinim, judgment. And though the state of being in Eden depicted Breshit was ephemeral and won't become our reality until sinners disappear from the earth and the wicked cease to be, some of its concealment becomes revealed in small ways when we serve Hashem, God, and do His will, as light begets light. This is done by constantly remembering, as we read very clearly in this Torah portion of Ekev, that our success is never our own. It is the Holy One who wills our success and well-being. We need to put the work in to succeed, suiting up, showing up, as the phrase goes, but ultimately the result is not in our hands. There is something freeing about remembering that it's all there is a creator of all, and the more we can live in alignment with that, the clearer the light becomes for each of us. So that's the power of tzedakah. And it's also this idea of we work so hard so that charity and money, it's sort of a manifestation of all of the work, all of the worries, all the stress, all of the things that we're putting behind the work and the money, that which it represents. So giving tzedakah, it's this idea of parting with this, of giving something that all of these worries and all of this work has gone into this thing, and it's really aligning with this emunah and bitachon and trust that we can give all this amount of money and we trust that it will come back because we're not ultimately in charge of that. It's in God's hands what we actually receive. And the word ahava, love, is related to hav in Aramaic, which means to give. The idea is that loving is giving, and by giving we create more love. So Shabbat Shalom, this was the chapter, There's Always Money in the Banana Stand, in my 5th book, Light of the Infinite, Emanations of Illumination. Love you guys. Shabbat Shalom.